Hello, my lovelies. This is Trey from Iron Sharpens Iron Council, and today we are going to talk about the statutory court fees, the ones behind the scene that not only do you not know about, but they actually deliberately have fought very hard to conceal those fees and what they're all about. I was just reading in some cases where all these different fees and assessments that are happening behind the scenes, what's typical is you get a sentence, right? The judge maybe imposes some fines on you for whatever it is you did wrong, and it's put in an order, have a nice day. Well, so you think. What I'm finding is that a lot of the times what happens after that is the clerk then imposes fees that you are not expecting. So you don't even know that this occurs, and then all of a sudden you're flipping another couple $1,000s in bills, and you're like, wait, where did that come from? So what happens is the clerks are reading the statutes and applying fees that the statutes allow. That's not their decision. Okay. And these court cases absolutely clarify that. So if you have an order from the court to say pay $1,000 in fines, and that's all it says, all of a sudden you get another bill from the clerk, say for another $500. Well, that's an invalid fee or fine, whatever they're putting on you, because they're not judges. Okay. So the only ones who can actually impose a fee is in fact the court, and only through a court order. The clerks do not have the authority to then implement fees on their own accord. They can only follow judicial orders. They can't just make stuff up and do what they want to do when they want. But this is not only what they are doing, it's what they're doing consistently. So even though they've had lawsuits come against them for these fees, they are still doing it as of today. And I've traced back cases for years where people are going into the courts, appellate courts, telling them that this fee was, not in the order. And it's always, in the favor of the complainant, because they're invalid. They can't impose a fee on their own accord. So the state just keeps doing it basically because they know that most people won't question it or catch it. And they also know that it's worth it to them financially because only a handful of people will actually catch it and then do something about it. So the rest of the people are SOL because they don't understand the system. They don't know this is happening. And they most certainly aren't going to put themselves through a burdensome appeal and a cost of an appeal over a $250 fine. That's how honest these people are. So we're going to kind of go through what these fees behind the scenes are. And the reason we're going to go through them too is because I think you'll find it interesting that many of the fees that are assessed by the clerk have absolutely zero to do with court function. So these fees that they're implementing or imposing upon us are nothing to do with supporting the court, and that's what it was meant for. That was what it was purposed for. So if you're going to pay any fees, it should go to, say, clerical duties and recording and anything that makes the court function. But these fees actually go to some of their trade partners, some of the people that they do business with, and like the police force, to child support, to child protective services. So even if you're in the court having a case in regards to traffic, they're actually giving you a fee to pay to the Child Protection Service Agency. Why? What if you don't have kids? You don't have to put your money into that. And I'm going to tell you why. Because if they didn't bury it or hide it behind the court fees, then they might actually have to pay taxes on it. What a great way to evade taxes, because if we're contributing to all these different organizations they love so much, well, then of course they might actually get, taxed on the money that they're receiving. So I believe, I can't prove obviously, but I believe it's a tax evasion reason as to why they're doing it. But I'll let you be the judge of that. So we're going to go through some of these statutory court fees and what this statutory court fee task force has said about it. So what a task force is, just to give you a rundown, is they create within your community a group of people who are charged with a specific duty and task to look into a specific area that is going to need a team of people to analyze, assess, and come up with conclusions and solutions where they find that there is a problem. And so these task force come together in what are called trade partner agreements. So these trade partner agreements will include a bunch of different agencies that are going to all help each other by supplying each other with various information from their own databases, by providing, laborers to dig into things. And that's a lot of what these fees are kind of going to. So I find that interesting. They're funding themselves to help their fellow affiliates. So I think that's what makes this extraordinarily interesting. So this task force is basically just looking into all those behind the scene fees and how they apply and why they should or should not apply. It's quite long, so of course I'm not going to get into all of it, but I just want to give you a general overview of why it is that whenever you're dealing with an agency, of course they have much interest in you getting into the courtroom to begin with, but then all the other actors inside of that courtroom have interest in your guilt. So if you are not guilty, you won't put in the money, you won't put into the pot, and somebody's got to pay for all these committees and task force, so it might as well be you, right? But here we go. I'll read a little bit over this to give you a clear understanding of what's going on here. So in virtually all civil, traffic, and criminal proceedings, wide county-to-county variations in the fees and costs for the same type of proceedings injects additional arbitrariness and unfairness into the system. What a concept. Freaking geniuses. Solutions to these problems have been identified. The Access to Justice Act created a statutory court fee task force, that's these guys, with members appointed by representatives of all three branches of Illinois government and both political parties, to study the current system of fees, fines, and other court costs, collectively assessments, and propose recommendations to the Illinois General Assembly and Illinois Supreme Court to address this growing problem. Drawing upon the broad and varied experience of its members, whose members include legislators, judges, lawyers, and court clerks, the task force developed a package of recommendations contained in this report. The members of task force are unanimously support of adoption and implementation of these recommendations. So that just kind of gives you an overview of what the task force is and what they found, that these fees cause for arbitrariness and unfairness. Well, yeah, because everybody has stake in the game. If a judge doesn't close his case, then he doesn't get credit for all these affiliate organizations that they're going to collect fees for. So this is a really huge problem, because how can you have a fair and meaningful hearing if everybody is goal or tasked to close these cases? So if you go to your Supreme Court websites, you can actually look up the reports in regards to the case closure variable rates that your courts have, and you'll find that almost every court is somewhere in the 90th percentile as far as case closures go, meaning that when they close the case, all these fees and fines and stuff are assessed. So 98% in most of the courts means that it's kind of like closing a sales deal. If they don't close that deal, nobody gets paid. So the judge has every incentive to make sure, whether you're innocent or guilty or whatever, that the case gets closed so that they can collect those fees. Otherwise, like a salesman, he's not doing his job. And if he's not closing deals, he may not be able to be put on that bench, because that's how they are that's how they are analyzed to get their promotions, raises, so forth and so on, is based on that case closure rate. So if you think about it, like I said, from a sales perspective, the more deals you close, the better your opportunities in your position will be. So that's why this particular fee assessment that they're doing is just, in my opinion, grotesque. Especially since some of the fees and fines that they charge you for, the way they're getting dispersed into these various different organizations, these organizations may have some sort of moral implication for you or religious implication for you. You don't know you're paying it, and it may be something that you're not okay with. So that's another issue, in my opinion. I don't know that they came up with that in their assessment in the end, because I didn't get to read the whole thing, but I just wanted to show you how these fees come about and why. So they tell you here, the nature and purpose of assessments have changed over time, leading to a Byzantine system that attempts to pass and increase share of the cost of court administration onto the parties to court proceedings. The notion of a self-funded court system has gained increased currency in recent years, resulting in a complex web of filing fees, fines, surcharges, and other costs levied against civil litigants and criminal defendants. Cumulatively substantial, despite often being individually modest, these assessments undermine the state's commitment to provide its citizens with access to the courts and civil proceedings, while distorting and unduly increasing the financial repercussions associated with criminal and traffic charges. These problems have been exacerbated by the ability of various special interest groups, not the people, but they like special interest groups better than the people, because as you can see, at a 98% case closure rate, clearly the special interest groups are who they have in mind when these people are sitting in this court. So basically you're saying that all these people that come in here are automatically guilty every single time? I doubt it. So anyways, their ability of various special interest groups to finance aspects of their operations on the back of court users. Today, it is all too common for litigants to pay for services through additional assessments that are wholly unrelated to the court system. Court fines and fees are constantly increasing and are outpacing inflation. There has been a tremendous growth in the assessments imposed on the parties to court proceedings. Plaintiffs generally pay several $100s simply to file a case. Civil defendants who lack any say in whether to become involved in litigation are often required to pay hundreds of dollars to defend themselves or risk a default judgment. Criminal and traffic defendants frequently leave court with hundreds or even thousands of dollars in assessments on top of what they're supposed to be the only financial consequences intended to punish, namely fines imposed by the court. The trend shows no sign of abating, as each new legislative session brings with it fresh proposals of increased or additional assessments at the time when many wages are stagnant. These additional assessments are creating further financial strain on the low and moderate income litigants. There is excessive variation across the state in amount of assessments for the same type of proceedings. The fairness of a court system is often measured in part by its consistency. It is therefore troubling that civil and criminal assessments in our state are wildly inconsistent from county to county. Amen to that. Let me tell you something. You cannot find cases within these counties that would make any logical sense. You know, you could be committing the same act, have a completely different amount of a fine, or possibly one of you may end up in jail and the other one may not, even though the offenses were completely the same. And that actually, I believe, is a great way or a great window into the truth behind the way the court systems work. Because how is it possible, if all of you are experts in law, are you telling me that some of you can't read the law? Some of you can't possibly interpret it the same? How does that work? If you're in a profession by which you profess to be an expert in, why is there so many disagreements upon the rules and just the basics of the profession? It doesn't make sense. So either somebody's not an expert and they're professing to be one where they are not, or perhaps our experts who design this stuff don't know what they're doing. Either way, it doesn't make sense. So a civil litigant may pay 3 times as much as a resident in a neighboring county for the exact same court service. Criminal defendants may find that their sentences can be severely impacted by something as insignificant as the side of the street on which their arrest occurred. Sick. The resulting inconsistency threatens the fairness, both actual and perceived, of the current system. The cumulative impact of the assessments imposed on parties to civil lawsuits and defendants in criminal and traffic proceedings imposes severe and disproportionate impacts on low and moderate income Illinois residents. The collective impact of the current system of assessments is significant on financially insecure Illinois residents. Individual and families in need of legal remedy may go without if the costs of using the courts are too high. Criminal defendants may find their reentry into society severely burdened if their court debt is unmanageable. With relief from runaway court costs, more and more Illinois residents will be forced to decide between protecting their legal rights and paying their basic living expenses. These findings led the task force to adopt 5 core principles which informed and influenced all of its recommendations. Courts should be substantially funded from general government revenue sources. Court users may be required to pay reasonable assessments to offset a portion of the costs of the courts borne by a public at large. Well, it's vague, so I'm not sure what they're talking about, but also what happens are the courts pool, usually when they want to do improvements on the building or, increase the people they have working for them, things like that, they will pull from what's called the general funds. Those general funds are utilized for benefit or for enjoyment of everyone. So I'm going to disagree with that statement if that's what they're speaking on, because there's actually a federal case that I had read about how that would be basically policing for profit, and that it was in violation of the Constitution based on that principle that they are self-enriching by utilizing the court system through those general funds. So another problem, too big to get into in this video, but if you think about that logically, if they're enriching in any way, shape, or form, then that's an emolument issue. They're not supposed to be trying to make themselves more comfortable. They're supposed to be serving the public. So, all right, so relationship between assessments and access to the courts. The amount of assessments should not impede access to the courts and should be waived to the extent possible for indigent litigants and working poor. I also disagree with that, because where there comes a waiver for indigent litigants also becomes a debt for the indigent litigant. So I would say no thank you, because if they deem that you're indigent, they're also deeming you to be somehow behaviorally insufficient in comparison to the rest of society. And you don't want them to believe that about you just because you don't have money. Maybe you choose to, who cares? But the point is, it's not their business. How about that? So transparency and uniformity. Assessments should be simple, easy to understand, and uniform to the extent possible. Relationships between assessments and their underlying rationale. Assessments should be directly related to the operation of the court system. Oh my goodness, geniuses. Again, who would have ever thought that's a possibility? Or why should we actually assess the actual cost of the services being provided to the litigants? Why would we want to do that? Not lucrative enough, right? Assessments imposed for a particular purpose should be limited to the types of court proceedings that are related to that purpose. Monies raised by assessments intended for a specific purpose should be used only for that purpose. So they're freaking geniuses, the experts, gotta love them. The General Assembly should periodically review all assessments to determine if they should be adjusted or repealed. Are you telling me the General Assembly doesn't review the assessments? Is the court legislating from the courtroom in the judicial branch? Is that what they're saying? It's what it sounds like. The task force developed 6 recommendations in accordance with these core principles to address the findings summarized below, and the recommendations are as follows. The task force proposes enactment of the Court Clerk Assessment Act, a statute that will codify in one place all court assessments other than those imposed in connection with the disposition of criminal and traffic proceedings. Okay, so I won't get into too much of their recommendation, I think pretty much it's all caca. You know, if we're going to have a service that's meant to be to service the people for a specific reason, then the cost should reflect in specificity, and they should have over this entire period of time. Why are we just discovering this now? So I really don't care to go over what exactly it is, their opinions of how to fix it is, because ultimately, even if they pull it from the general funds, as I told you before, that could be deemed as being unconstitutional based on the federal case I had recently read. So I don't know why they're making these kinds of recommendations. They must not have seen that case, but you know, professionals and experts, they don't actually have an expertise, I suppose. So kind of just goes over the history of the task force here and the Constitution and their standing about how they feel about this whole scenario. Let's see. Historically, court fees were intended simply to offset a portion of the cost of the services being provided. Recognizing that the court system benefited all members of society, a majority of funding came from taxpayer revenue. Today, civil litigants and defendants in criminal and traffic proceedings still pay fees designed to cover the costs associated with administering their cases. However, they are now required to cover many additional costs, including but not limited to those associated with court security, law libraries, and children's waiting rooms, as well as programs completely unrelated to the administration of justice, like roadside memorials and after-school programs. Over the years, more and more costs have been passed on to the court patrons through an elaborate web of fees and fines that are next to impossible to decipher and severely lacking in uniformity and transparency. The report in depth the shortcomings of the current system and its impact to Illinois citizens. The report concludes with a series of recommendations to address those problems. So again, they're just reiterating all these fees you're paying. You should only maybe pay, say, a $200 to have a service from the court to administer your case. But in actuality, after they chalk up all the donations they are forcing you to give to these various organizations, it ends up being in the thousands, especially in specific style of cases like DUIs. The amount that you end up paying for a DUI is far more than you should if those fees would actually go just to the court administration and nothing else. So now this is also, keep in mind, only talking right now about the fines and the fees. They're not talking about the lawyer's fees. They're not talking about all the additional costs incurred during the course of litigation that ends up to accumulate in the tens of thousands. So if you're innocent and you don't have tens of thousands of dollars, well, you're going to donate to all these causes then. That's really how the system works. Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong. It wouldn't matter because they don't have any intention on ever allowing you, based on their 98% case closure rate, to win a case. And if you don't have an attorney, you're pretty popped. And even then, it's still 50-50, all that money you put in there. So now it just kind of goes over the way they break them down. Not really all that important. You guys can pull this from your local your local Supreme Courts. Just look up court assessments in there, and you could probably grab a hold of all of this information from this task force, or just pull up the task force website in your local area. So to participate in civil litigation, each party must first pay the application court assessments. While the total amount can vary widely by both case type and the county in which the case is pending, each county follows the same basic formula in calculating civil assessments. So these are just some graphs to show you how much everyone will file when they're trying to just be heard on a matter that you may not voluntarily be in there for and may be unjustly brought upon you. So even if you're innocent, you're still paying all this. You ain't getting a refund is what I'm saying. So this is absolutely absurd and ridiculous, and just, like I said, it's grotesque. It's makes no sense, but whatever. It just kind of goes over, like I said, all of the different analysis that they did. And this is a criminal case, okay? So local add-ons to that case, The Children's Advocacy Center? Why would you donate to something like that? Do you know what these people do? I morally have no intent on ever giving them any money because they are a horrible place. Horrible. Okay, so county jail medical costs. Well, if you don't end up in county jail, are you paying that? Why are you paying for their medical care? I mean, the state has insurance. Use it. County mental health drug veteran service member courts, peer teen courts, judgment of guilties or fined, judicial facilities. Okay, fine, I get the judicial facilities part. Court app, a special advocate. If you didn't get the special advocate, I sure hope that that's not adding on to your specific case. And then the drug court fee. Well, if you don't have a drug issue, then why would you be donating to drug court? It makes no sense. Then you have your court add-ons, court automation and documentation storages, court security. Forget your security. If that's a luxury item right there, you want security, you want that benefit, that emolument, pay for it out of your own pension funds. How about that? Electronic citation, criminal lab analysis, DNA analysis. I mean, it just goes on and on. And I can keep going from each and every one of these different assessments that they did over various different counties. But it just shows you when you look at these, that one county, you may end up with like $5,000 worth of fees, and in another county, it might only be 500. So there's no real rhyme or reason to it. But that also lets you know that the clerk's office is legislating how many fees that they can chalk up. When did Congress or the Senate say that they were allowed to put all this on there? I can't find it. And how come they don't disclose it on the onset? Because they don't want you to know, because this creates a major conflict of interest and you don't even realize it. Because all the people, some of these monies also go to support the state police and the police, local police forces. So that's what I was saying before in a previous video, your taxes, your tax dollars do not pay the police. So to say, when people run around and saying, oh, well, I pay you, you're my servant, that is so untrue. This money comes mostly from this type of circumstance through the courts, but actually the other part of the money comes from private investors. So no, they don't work for you. Never make the mistake in believing that they do. But again, you can pull all of this information. This one I got from the Supreme Court's website itself. And, you know, this just tells you all the details about all the different counties. And if they're doing that here in the state, it is likely they're doing it in the other states as well. But just so that you can really understand where this is going, it's just not, it's not good. This case that I kind of got into after finding all this, it explains here about how these clerks are just assessing these fees into the case after judgment was rendered by the court. So you have to understand that this is not a judgment that the clerks are making. At first I got excited because I thought we might be able to appeal it if you find it, but in my opinion, you should be able to, but apparently in the Supreme Court of Illinois, they don't believe you can go into the appellate courts on it. What it's explaining in here, so there is a well-recognized distinction between rendering a judgment and entering a judgment. The former is the judicial act of the court in pronouncing its ruling or finding in the controversy. The latter is the ministerial act of the clerk in preserving the record of that decision. So what they're saying here is that when somebody renders a judgment on their own accord, that is a judicial function, and only a judicial branch employee can actually do such a thing. In the latter, what they're saying is that the clerks can only enter into the record what the judge ordered. They can't just pass judgments. It's not their job. But they are doing it every day to this day for many years, regardless of case after case saying that it is an invalid assessment and an invalid judgment. But people will go to complain like, hey, this is not a part of my judgment. And now here's your choice. Either you pay it or you pay additional money going to court to fight it. So they break the law, and now you have to pay to get another court case open to invalidate the clerk's judicial act against the law. He's the one who breaks law, and you pay for it. Fabulous. Gotta love it. But I just wanted to give you an insider view on how that all works so that you know who you're paying for, what and why behind the scenes. And I highly recommend everyone looks into this. It's going to make you angry, but whatever, it is what it is. So anyways, I hope this was very informational for you. I hope it gave you something new to think about that you didn't know before. Everybody have a fantastic day. Don't forget to click the like button, and make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. And tune into the next show where we will be dropping more truth bombs on how the system works as we learn government together. Have a great day.